I also want to talk about the fact that you mentioned that Kofi Annan's plan, the UN Arab League envoy for Syria, he resigned and Lakhdar Brahimi took over. Do you think with this new position, Brahimi seems, we don't know what to expect from him yet. Do you think this new position, this new reinstatement is going to help things, maybe alleviate the situation, given that Kofi Annan's plan has failed thus far?
Well, my view is that the Annan initiative and the Lakhdar Brahimi initiative are not things that can succeed by imposing or pushing a solution. They can only be effective at a point in time when the parties are in such a jam, such a difficult situation that they need an exit. So it's very important and very useful to have a mediator like Lakhdar Brahimi standing by effectively. At the time being, the Syrian regime and the Syrian rebellion are not interested in mediating because the rebels feel that they're winning on the ground, so that why compromise with a regime that they think is falling? And the regime feels it's strong enough to face down the rebellion or to survive the rebellion, so why give in to the rebels? Why compromise? So at the time being, there's very little hope, and I think Lakhdar Brahimi himself expressed it, that right now
it's near impossible.
It's near impossible now
exact words, right,
to find a solution. But in conflicts of this nature, whether it was the Lebanese conflict before, other conflicts in other parts of the world, conflicts are amenable to resolutions only at certain points in time when the conflicting parties themselves feel that they want a way out. And clearly in Syria, that point has not been arrived at yet.
One last point that people still discuss, ironically, is there is still discussion and debate about whether President Bashar al-Assad should be part of the transition deal or not. Do you think there is still a possibility for him to be part of this?
I do not think so. Certainly that's the condition that the regime, that Bashar al-Assad's regime is putting. Maybe it's not a surprise. He is, presides over that regime. But my reading, even of the Russian position, is that they understand that he has to go, but he is not accepting the principle that he goes, at least not yet. At a point where at which point that he may accept that principle, I think we again will have the possibility of a negotiated agreement, because Russia and the US and some other players might agree on common ground in which the president and small group leave, in which there is serious domestic political reform, in which there is some moderation of foreign policy, but the armed forces and much of the regime stays in place to prevent chaos and civil war in Syria, but there is a managed transition. That would be similar a little bit to what happened in Egypt or even in Tunisia and elsewhere, where the army and the state, much of it remained, most of it remained, but the regime and the president and so on had to leave.
I want to move on to Iran, Syria's neighbor. Iran considers Syria a strategic partner, and Iran's getting a lot of heat from world powers over its nuclear program, and it's getting specifically even more heat from Israel, which considers it a threat to its very existence. So how does the Iran-Israel dynamic play on the region, and including with the Syrian conflict right now?
Well, Iran obviously is very concerned about what's happening in Syria. They certainly support the regime in all means possible. I think they still feel that the regime can survive this crisis. They have themselves gone through many crises internally and externally. If the regime weakens further, they might also throw their weight behind a transition in which President Assad leaves, but much of the regime and its military relations with Iran and Russia remains, even if the president changes. So I think they have fallback positions. They also have ways to maintain strategic relations with, even if the regime collapses, the Alawi-dominated armed forces and intelligence and much of the military power might then retreat, as it were, to another part of Syria, which would be maybe the northwest and other parts of Syria. And through a corridor between northwest Syria, the northern Biqa, Hezbollah in the south and so on, they could still maintain a strong strategic presence vis-à-vis Israel, but they would be much weaker if they lost Damascus.